My dad chose my sister over me. I didn't argue, I didn't fight. I just left her one letter. But when my sister opened it, she exploded. "You're joking!" I could almost hear the echo of her voice, shrill and incredulous, as she read the words I'd left behind. But it wasn't really her voice I heard. It was the years of everything that had come before. The silence in the rooms where I'd waited. The years of doing what needed to be done while everyone else looked away. I'd spent so much of my life making sure the things that had to be taken care of were the house, the business, my parents. Someone had to keep everything running. So I did. Without asking for anything, without even so much as a thank you. My sister, Lena, was the face of our family. She always had been. She smiled for the photos, posed for the family holidays, always the center of attention. And me? I just kept the world from falling apart around her. The house always smelled like something faintly floral, like the lavender that my mom used to make sure the place felt fresh. But I knew better. The lavender couldn't cover up the weight of everything that wasn't said. It never could. I spent most of my time in the background making sure the bills were paid, that my parents' business didn't crumble, that the house stayed clean, that everyone had what they needed. Meanwhile, Lena got the attention, the praise I would never get. Every time she called home, my parents answered. She was the one they'd invested in. She was the one they'd hoped would carry on the legacy. But it was always the same. She was busy, living her life in the city, building a career, while I stayed behind to keep things together. And then, the family business faltered. My father, once strong and reliable, began to fall ill. My mother too. Staff started leaving, and the business that once thrived began to struggle. The mortgage payments piled up, but when the call came, it wasn't for Lena, it was for me. They turned to me to keep everything afloat, as if I were some kind of safety net, and I kept my mouth shut. I just did it, because that was my role, always in the background, always making sure things didn't fall apart. It wasn't until one night, sitting in the cold vinyl of a hospital chair at 2 a.m, when I signed the power of attorney for my parents, that I finally realized the truth. My mother whispered, "You're good with the serious things." It wasn't a compliment. It was a quiet acknowledgement of my role. I was the one who carried everything. But it didn't have to be that way. I remember looking in the mirror after one particularly long shift, seeing my reflection in the glass doors of the facility. My hair was pulled back into a tight knot, my posture straight and rigid. I looked so much older than I was. It was as though the weight of the years had settled into my bones. I didn't look like someone in her late 20s. I looked like someone who had already lived an entire life. I hated that feeling, the sense of being stuck in a role that wasn't mine. But I had made myself indispensable. I had been forced into it. But over time, I had come to believe that it was the only role I could play. And now, as I sat in the stillness of the house that used to feel like home, I realized how much I had lost. All the years of giving, of working, of sacrificing. All of it had been invisible. That night, as I sat on the edge of my bed, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, I knew something had to change. The letter I'd written to Lena had been brewing for a long time. It wasn't angry or filled with bitterness. It wasn't meant to punish anyone. It was just the truth that no one had wanted to see. Truth that I was no longer willing to ignore. I placed the letter on my desk and stared at it. The envelope was simple, but inside was everything I had carried silently for years. A timeline of everything I had done, every crisis I had handled, every moment I had stepped in to fix the damage no one else had noticed. I couldn't keep pretending that none of it mattered. I couldn't keep pretending I was just the one in the background. Tomorrow, it would all change. And no one would see it coming. The house always smelled like lavender. It was faint, almost too subtle to notice unless you were lingering in the hallway for a while. But it was there, the way my mother liked it. The smell of lavender was supposed to make things feel clean, fresh, like everything was under control. But I knew better. I knew the lavender couldn't cover up what was real, the unspoken tension, the things we never said, the way my sister Lena was always the center of everything, and I was just there, always in the background, always fixing, always cleaning up the messes no one else saw. I remember the first time I realized how different Lena's life was. I was just a kid, maybe 8 or 9, trailing behind my dad as he walked through the halls of the facility he ran. He'd stop to greet every resident by name, his voice warm, his posture perfect, like he had all the time in the world. I wasn't so much walking as I was pushing a wheelchair, one that was too big for me, my toes barely reaching the floor to keep it steady. I could hear the rattle of the wheels, and each time my dad glanced over his shoulder at me, he'd smile, but it was a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Careful, Tara," he'd say, his tone more of a command than a suggestion. But he was already turning back to whoever he was talking to, as if I wasn't even there. Lena never had to push wheelchairs. She never had to be quiet or go unnoticed. She was the one who wore the pretty dresses, the one my mom posed in front of the Christmas tree for photos that would end up on the family album, captions about how bright our future was. I was always somewhere in the background of those pictures, half cut off, holding a clipboard or cleaning up some spill no one noticed. Lena was the star, and I was the person who made sure the show went on. It wasn't just the photos, it was everything. I remember one of my birthdays when I was 12. Lena had a huge cake with sparklers, and there were dozens of relatives crowding around her, laughing, clapping, all eyes on her. But when my birthday came around 2 months later, it was just a sheet cake from the grocery store, half frosted, already leaning to one side. I remember the cake so clearly, not because of what it was, but because of the way my mom kissed my cheek and told me to grab my work uniform before heading to the facility for my evening shift. She didn't ask if I wanted to go. She didn't even mention it was my birthday. It was just a given, like everything else was. I wasn't allowed to want things. Wanting things made me an inconvenience. And so I stopped wanting. I stopped asking for anything. I filled medication drawers, folded towels, answered phone calls that were never for me, and helped residents write holiday cards because no one else had time for it. I became the person no one noticed, the person who solved problems quietly, whose usefulness erased the need for praise. But it wasn't just the small things. It was the big things, too. Every time something went wrong, my parents turned to me. They didn't even have to ask. I was already there, already making the calls, making sure everything worked. But when it came time to be recognized for it, no one noticed. When I got straight A's, my dad barely looked up from his laptop. "Expected from you," he'd say, his eyes never leaving the screen. But when Lena struggled with a single math problem, they hired a tutor. The same tutor that had helped her for years, the same tutor who would always praise her for every little success. It wasn't even fair. I knew, deep down, that I was the one who held everything together. My parents never saw it. They saw Lena as the future. I was just the one who was expected to make sure everything stayed functional. But the truth was, no one else could have done it. Without me, the system would have fallen apart. Lena's career was a dream my parents spoke of, with reverence. She moved to the city, made a name for herself in creative media. My parents always told people that Lena was the one who would carry on the legacy. But when they called home for money, it was never for me. They'd send it to her. Always. She never had to worry about anything. But I didn't resent her. I couldn't. She wasn't the one making the rules. She was just the one living under them, enjoying the benefits without ever seeing the cost. And then, one day, it all came crashing down. My father got sick. My mother followed soon after. The business started faltering, and everything that had once seemed so steady was suddenly fragile. The staff started leaving. The phone calls came more often, the invoices piling up. It wasn't a matter of if anymore. It was a matter of how. And when the call came, it wasn't for Lena. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. I took the calls. I signed the documents. I kept the business running because I was the only one who could. And it felt like too much. But I never said a word. I never asked for help. I just did it. Because that's what I had always done. I was the one who kept the lights on. The one who made sure the system didn't collapse. No one asked for my help. No one saw me. But I was tired of it. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being the one who made everything work without ever getting credit. It wasn't enough anymore. And deep down, I knew it. I had known it for years, but I hadn't had the courage to do anything about it. Until now, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was just before sunrise. The sky still dark, with only the faintest hint of gray creeping across the horizon. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everyone else is still asleep, and the weight of everything I had to do felt heavy on my chest. The call was from the office. One of the staff members, a nurse, was updating me on a situation I should have already known about. It wasn't anything major, just a small error in the medication logs, but it was the third call this week. I hadn't even had a chance to sleep properly, and here I was, already being pulled back into the cycle of fixing things that no one else could or would. I rubbed my eyes, sitting up in bed. The darkness felt suffocating, the quiet too still. For years, it had been like this. The calls, the responsibility, always waiting for the next crisis, always preparing for the next thing that needed to be handled. I had spent so much time doing everything for everyone else that I didn't even know what it felt like to breathe without the weight of it all. But something had changed. I had started to realize that I didn't have to carry it anymore. I didn't have to be the one who always cleaned up after everyone. I didn't have to be the one to hold everything together when no one even noticed how hard I was working. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent giving, and receiving nothing in return. Nothing but the quiet, unspoken expectation that I would keep going. I would keep doing it, and I would do it without question. That morning, I decided I wouldn't. I went to the kitchen, still feeling the fog of sleep in my mind. The smell of coffee was already in the air, and I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't sure if it was the stillness of the house or just the fact that I had reached the end of my rope, but something in me was different. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that I was fine when I was so far from it. I couldn't keep playing the part of the daughter who did everything and received nothing. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen, where I had left the folder I'd started putting together the night before. I hadn't told anyone about it, not yet. But it was time. Time to put everything into words, to lay out the years of work and sacrifice that no one had ever seen, no one had ever recognized. But I was done being invisible. The folder was thick, a stack of documents that outlined everything the years I had spent managing the business when my parents were too sick or too distracted to care, the things I had done when my sister had been too busy with her life to even pick up the phone. I had written it all out in black and white, not with emotion, but with the simple truth. A timeline of every crisis I had stepped into, every time I had put out a fire no one else saw. I had written it in the most detached way possible, but still, the weight of it felt heavy on my shoulders as I placed it on the kitchen counter. My fingers hovered over the documents. It was real now. There was no going back. As I stood there, I thought about Lena. I thought about the way she had always been the one to get the praise, the admiration, the way she had always been the one to get the things I wanted: attention, freedom, ease. She didn't know what it was like to have to fight for every inch, to have to put yourself aside just to make sure everything worked. She never saw me, not really. She never saw how much I had sacrificed for her, for them, but I didn't care about that anymore. The letter I had written to Lena wasn't about revenge or anger. It wasn't even about her. It was about me, about reclaiming what had been taken from me for so long. I had put myself last for so many years that I didn't even know what it meant to put myself first. But I was going to find out. I was going to show them all that I was more than just the person who cleaned up their messes. I opened the folder again and ran my fingers over the timeline I had created. The facts were all there, the history of my quiet sacrifice laid out in black and white. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't just about the facts. It was about making them see it, making them understand that I had been holding up a system that didn't value me, that didn't even see me. I grabbed a pen from the drawer and added one more thing to the timeline: a date. Today. The day I was going to stop being invisible. The day I was going to show Lena and my parents that there was more to this business than the glossy image they had always seen. I stood back, looking at the folder in front of me. It wasn't just a collection of papers anymore. It was my truth. The truth I had been hiding from everyone, even myself. And it was time to share it. I didn't know what time it was when I sat down at the kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of me. The room was still dark, the early morning light creeping through the cracks in the blinds. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet sound of my own breathing, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't that I hadn't thought this through. I had. Over and over again. But the weight of actually doing it, of finally taking action after so many years of quietly accepting my role in the background, felt heavier than I had expected. For so long, I had been the one to make sure everything worked, and now, I was about to make sure that nothing worked the way they thought it would. I took a deep breath and pulled the first document toward me. It was the timeline I had spent hours creating. The events, the moments I had been the one to handle. The early mornings and late nights, the times I had dropped everything to fix problems that no one else even knew about. I had listed it all. Every single thing I had done, medication logs, staffing issues, compliance reports, handling crises when my parents were too sick to manage. I had done it all, and now, it was time to make them see it. I added another sheet of paper to the pile. This one was different. It was a list of the things I had protected, the business's structure, the contracts, the partnerships with other facilities. All the things no one would notice until it was too late. No one, except me. For years, I had been the person keeping the system intact. I had made sure the licenses were up to date, the regulations followed, the staff trained. No one had ever asked me to do it. No one had ever said, "Thank you." But without me, it all would have fallen apart. I looked at the documents again, my hands shaking slightly. The final piece was the hardest. The letter. The letter to Lena. The one that would expose everything. The one that would show her just how little she understood about what she was about to inherit. It wasn't an angry letter. It wasn't full of accusations or blame. It was simply the truth. The truth of everything I had done. The truth of everything I had carried on my shoulders, alone. And now, it was time to show her. To show all of them. I picked up my pen and started writing. The words came easily at first. I wrote about the system I had built and kept running. The foundation that no one else knew about. The one that held everything up. I didn't need to build a case, I had already done that. All I had to do was assemble it, lay it out for them to see. I wrote about the licenses, the vendors, the compliance standards I had put in place. I wrote about the partnerships with doctors, with caseworkers, with families who trusted me when no one else would. And then I wrote about Lena, about how she had never understood any of it. How she had always been the face of the family, the one who got all the praise, while I did the work behind the scenes. I wrote about how, in the end, she was going to inherit something that wasn't as shiny as she thought. Something that, without the systems I had put in place, was nothing but a shell. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. The final lines were the hardest to write. They were simple, direct. What you carry next depends on what you choose to hold. I placed the pen down, the words on the page staring back at me. There was no going back now. This letter was the final step in the process I had started long ago. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't change the years of being overlooked, being the one who always cleaned up after everyone else. But I could change what happened next. I could stop letting them control me. I slid the letter into a red envelope, the weight of it suddenly too much to bear. I had spent so long carrying the burden for everyone else, and now I was finally letting it go. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about freedom. Freedom from the expectations that had been placed on me for so long. Freedom from the role I had been forced to play. I stood up, the letter in my hands, and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding, but I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel anxious. I felt like I had finally done something for myself, something that had taken years to build up the courage to do. And as I stepped outside into the quiet morning air, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, I knew one thing. Everything was about to change. The family dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The kind of gathering where everything was perfect, bright lights, soft music, people talking and laughing in that easy way that made everything seem light and effortless. It wasn't. The air in the room was thick with something I couldn't quite name, something beneath the laughter, beneath the clinking of silverware. I stood at the edge of it all, watching Lena as she talked with my parents. Her voice floated above the conversation, a little too high, a little too practiced. She was smiling, of course, always smiling, always in control of the room, effortlessly charming, but there was something more to it now. The mask was slipping, and I could see it. I wasn't supposed to be in the center of this moment. That was always Lena's place. I had stepped into the background years ago, accepted that this was her world, that she was the one who would carry on the family legacy, the one who would shine while I just kept everything intact. But tonight was different. I watched as my father raised his glass, his voice booming with pride. "Tonight we honor the future of our family's work," he said. His eyes locked on Lena, his smile wide, the kind of smile that made everyone else feel like they were part of something historic. "She's ready to lead," Lena beamed, the spotlight falling on her like it always did. It was like a rehearsed moment, the culmination of everything they had invested in her. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of years of being overlooked, I knew something had changed. I wasn't just standing in the background anymore. It was time. I didn't move at first. I let the silence settle over the room, a small, quiet gap in the conversation. My parents hadn't even noticed me standing there yet. They didn't. Lena didn't either. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the lights overhead, the rustle of someone adjusting their chair. Then, slowly, I walked toward the table. The room felt different now, the atmosphere thick with the unspoken. I didn't need to make a grand entrance, didn't need to say anything. I just placed the envelope on the table in front of me, my hands steady despite the thudding in my chest. For a moment, I just stood there, the quiet growing louder. I felt every pair of eyes on me, though no one was speaking. No one had expected this. I reached for the 3 items I had brought with me, the envelope, the keys, and the power of attorney documents, and placed them one by one in front of me. The sound of the keys against the wood of the table felt sharp, like the crispness of a final decision being made. Lena glanced at me for the first time since she had entered the room, the edge of her smile faltering as her eyes followed the path of what I was placing on the table. My father's attention shifted to me, his face clouding with confusion. "Tara, what's this?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. I just slid the keys toward Lena. "It's all yours," I said quietly. The room went still. For a brief second, the conversation stopped. The clinking of silverware halted. There was nothing but the tension, hanging between us like a weight. Lena reached for the red envelope first. Her fingers hesitated over it, her smile tight. She didn't understand what this was. She never had. She picked it up slowly, her eyes flickering between the envelope and me, a silent question hanging in the air. Then she opened it. I watched her face shift as she unfolded the paper, her smile faltering as she read. Her eyes darted from line to line, her expression tightening with each sentence. She flipped to the next page, her breath catching. The tension in the room grew thicker. I could feel it, see it in the way her hands shook just slightly as she read on. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. Her voice trembled as she read the next paragraph. This can't be right." Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood up, the letter still in her hands, her face pale. "You're joking," she said, her voice rising in disbelief. My father reached for the paper, his face turning pale as he scanned it quickly. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, eyes growing wider with each word. "Kara, what did you do?" he asked, his voice cracking. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. My mother reached over, her hand shaking as she grabbed the letter from my father's hands, scanning it quickly, her breath growing shallow. This says we don't own any of this," she murmured. Her voice was frantic, a sharp contrast to the calmness I felt inside. I nodded slowly, my voice quiet but steady. "The facilities are just buildings," I said, the words coming easily now. Nothing more. The room was completely silent now. No one spoke, no one moved. My father stood frozen, the letter crumpled in his hands, his face drained of color. My mother, too, stood motionless, her expression one of utter disbelief. In the corner of the room, Mr. Hayes, the family lawyer, had been standing quietly, almost invisible until now. He stepped forward, his voice calm, controlled. "Everything in that packet is accurate," he said, his tone smooth, yet final. "The transfers were executed 3 years ago, when Miss Tara Hart held full legal authority to act on behalf of her parents." Lena's eyes flickered between me and Mr. Hayes, her voice rising in panic. "So, what did they just give me?" Mr. Hayes folded his hands together, his face a study in calm. "2 aging properties and the debt tied to them. Anything more would require certification from Harbor Bridge." Certification, however, is contingent upon meeting the care standards Miss Hart designed. I have sinned. Lena stood frozen, the letter limp in her hands. My father's voice was barely a whisper. So, we have nothing? I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. They had exactly what they valued: appearance without structure, surface without substance. Lena's shoulders slumped, the posture that had once been so confident now crumpling under the weight of the reality she hadn't seen coming. I finally spoke again, my voice quiet but firm. You were taking over something real, I said, meeting her gaze. You just never saw it. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that fills up every space, wrapping itself around everything until it's impossible to ignore. It was a silence I had waited for, a silence that said everything I couldn't. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat and closed the folder with a soft click. His role in this moment done. The silence remained. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had already been laid bare, and for the first time, I felt free. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like hours, but it was only moments. My parents stood frozen, their faces pale as they absorbed the weight of the documents before them. Lena, who had been the glowing center of this family for so long, now stood with her shoulders slumped, the letter still clutched in her hands. I could see it in her eyes, the disbelief, the confusion. She hadn't expected this. No one had. My father finally broke the silence, his voice trembling as he looked up from the papers. Kara, what did you do? He asked, his words thick with panic. I didn't answer him. There was nothing to say. The documents were clear. The transfers had been made 3 years ago. Everything was in place. Nothing could be undone now. My mother, too, seemed to be in shock. She stared at the papers, her eyes flicking back and forth, unable to fully process what she was reading. This says we don't own any of this, she muttered, as though repeating it would make it less true. But it was true. I had made sure of that. Lena's breath hitched, and she stepped back from the table, her hands shaking as she scanned the pages. No, she whispered, almost to herself, like she was trying to make sense of it all. This can't be right. Her voice was quiet, but it cracked, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She was no longer the perfect daughter, the one who had always known how to charm her way through life. Now, she was just someone holding a piece of paper, staring at a future she had never prepared for. I let the silence settle around us, watching as my parents struggled to grasp what had just happened. My father's face went pale, and his hand trembled as he picked up the papers again, flipping through them in disbelief. Kara, how could you? How could I? I repeated, but I didn't say it out loud. The question hung in the air, heavy. Of course, they had no idea. They hadn't seen everything I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made. They hadn't seen the years I had spent propping up the business while they looked the other way. They hadn't seen how much I had done for them, how much I had quietly given. It wasn't just about business. It was about the way they had treated me for years. It was about how Lena had always been the shining star, while I was the one who quietly kept everything from falling apart. But I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. Lena, still holding the papers, looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and anger. What is this? She demanded, her voice sharp. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? I didn't answer right away. I let her ask the question, let her feel the sting of what had been hidden from her. She had always been the one to get everything handed to her. Now, she had to face the truth I had been holding for so long. My father, his voice trembling, turned to Mr. Hayes, who had been quietly standing in the corner, observing the scene with quiet professionalism. Is this real? He asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Mr. Hayes nodded, his face serious. Yes, Mr. Hart, it's all in order. The transfers were legal and executed properly. Miss Tara Hart was acting under full authority at the time. My father's face drained of color, and he turned to look at me. There was a moment, just a brief second, where I saw it, the realization that everything he had believed in, everything he had worked for, was slipping through his fingers. Why didn't you tell us? He asked again, his voice cracking this time. I had no answer for him. There was no point in explaining it now. The damage was done. The truth was out. Lena's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers again, her eyes scanning each page more frantically. This This can't be right, she repeated, her voice rising with panic. I don't understand. I thought. I thought I was taking over something real. Her words stung, even though I knew they weren't meant for me. They were meant for herself. She had always believed she would inherit a legacy, a business that had been built by our parents, that had been given to her on a silver platter. But now, she was seeing it for what it truly was, a shell, hollow and empty without the systems I had put in place. You were, I said, my voice steady. You were taking over something real. You just never saw it. The words were final. There was no more room for denial, no more space for excuses. Lena blinked, her eyes wide with the weight of the realization. I didn't know, she whispered, almost to herself. But it didn't matter. She wasn't the one who had been carrying the weight of the business all these years. I had been. The silence in the room grew deeper, heavier. My parents didn't speak. Lena didn't speak. Mr. Hayes, sensing the moment was over, stood quietly by the door, waiting for the right moment to leave. The truth had been laid bare, and there was nothing more to say. I looked at my parents, my mother's face pale, my father's expression one of disbelief. I didn't need to say anything more. They had seen what they needed to see. They had finally understood that I was no longer the person who could be ignored, the one who quietly did everything behind the scenes. For years, I had been the one holding everything together. But now, I was done. This was their mess to clean up, not mine. And as I turned and walked out of the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you finally let go of something you've been carrying for far too long. I didn't look back. The days after the family dinner blurred together, each one slipping by in a haze of quiet and absence. The phone didn't ring the way it used to, with my parents needing updates or asking for help with the business. No more late-night calls about inspections, no more last-minute emails about staffing shortages. It was as if the world had stopped spinning in the way it had before, when I was always the one who kept it turning. At first, it felt strange. I was used to being needed, to being the one people turned to when everything fell apart. But now, I was left in a quiet space that I didn't know how to fill. There was no more fixing. No more being the one who silently carried the weight of the family. I woke up to the soft hum of the city outside my window, the distant sound of traffic and the occasional shout of someone passing by. It was a familiar sound, but for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to someone else. I went to work at Harbor Bridge the next morning. The building was small, tucked away in a corner of the city, but there was a sense of calm inside that I had never felt before. The walls were lined with light gray paint. The air smelled like fresh coffee from the break room, and the quiet rhythm of staff members moving about their tasks felt right. This was a place where things ran smoothly, not because of me carrying everything, but because of the systems I had put in place. The volunteers had arrived early, and the activity in the halls was steady but low-key. I passed them by, exchanging polite smiles with a few familiar faces. The difference was subtle, but it was there. A shift. No longer was I the person who had to fix everything. I wasn't needed in the same way I had been. I could just be. That was the moment I understood what freedom felt like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some grand gesture. It was quiet. It was the absence of all the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. I sat in my office, looking out at the view of the river through the window. The morning light was soft, filtering through the glass, casting a warm glow over the space. I set my bag down on the desk, the familiar weight of it no longer carrying the burden it once had. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle in. Later, I had a meeting with Dr. Hale. He had been a part of this process from the beginning, someone I trusted to help me navigate all the legal aspects of what had transpired. He was an old friend, a mentor in some ways, and the calm presence I needed to guide me through this new chapter. When I arrived at his office, the door was already open, and I could hear the soft sound of his kettle whistling. It was a small thing, but it brought me comfort. Inside, the space was warm, the walls lined with books and papers that held the weight of decades of work. The scent of cedar and old leather filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at ease. I set the folder on the desk, the same one I had brought to my family days before. It was a collection of the documents that had started everything. The legal transfers, the power of attorney, and all the agreements that had followed. But now, they felt distant. I was no longer looking at them with the weight of anger or betrayal. I was looking at them with a sense of finality. Dr. Hale didn't ask me anything as he sat down across from me. He simply read through the papers, his glasses sliding down his nose as he studied each page carefully. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he was measuring the weight of each word. When he finished, he set the papers aside and looked at me. "They're moving without you," he said, his voice calm, but there was an understanding behind it. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction or triumph. It was a smile of relief. I didn't need to be part of that anymore. I didn't need to be the one holding everything up. "You're done asking to be seen," Dr. Hale added softly. It was true. I had spent so long trying to prove myself, trying to show my worth, but now, that wasn't necessary. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to keep asking for recognition. I had already built something real. It was time to step aside and let it stand on its own. The next few days passed in much the same way. The quiet settled in, like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I didn't have to be anyone's fixer anymore. I could just exist. I could breathe without worrying about what would break next. But even in this quiet, I couldn't escape the truth. My parents weren't the only ones who had been shaken by everything. I wasn't the only one who had carried the weight. Lena, too, had been left to deal with the aftermath of everything she thought she understood. I thought about her often, though I didn't reach out. I didn't know what to say, and I wasn't sure I ever would. It wasn't that I didn't care. I did. But I wasn't responsible for her anymore. I had spent so long trying to fix things for her, for my parents, for everyone else. Now, it was time to let them figure it out for themselves. A few days later, I drove past the family business. The building was dark, the lights inside flickering as if even the structure was uncertain about its future. But I didn't feel anything. No anger, no resentment, just a quiet understanding that it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Later that week, I saw Lena. She was at one of the Allied facilities, pushing a resident's wheelchair down the hall. The motion was careful, small steps that seemed out of place coming from her. I hadn't seen her like this before. She looked different. Her shoulders were less stiff, her smile more uncertain. It was the first time I'd seen her without the spotlight. She didn't see me, and I didn't approach her. I just watched her for a moment, the quiet shift in her that mirrored my own. Some stories end with a dramatic confrontation, but mine hadn't. There had been no shouting, no accusations, no final word. It was just quiet. And it was exactly what I needed. I walked away from it all. Not angrily, not with regret, but with a sense of finality that I hadn't felt in years. This was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anything that wasn't mine. The silence after the dinner seemed to linger longer than it should have. It filled the house, wrapped around every corner, every room, every place that had once felt alive with the sounds of our family's chatter and chaos. But now, it was just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in when everyone knows something has changed, but no one is sure what to do with it yet. I drove to the Harbor Bridge Center the next morning, as I always did, but the routine felt different now. The early morning light cast a soft glow over the city, reflecting off the river, and the cool breeze coming in through the car window felt almost like a new beginning. The world was still moving, still carrying on in its usual way, but for me, it had stopped. It had paused for just a moment, and in that moment, I could feel the weight that had been there for so long finally lifting. The center was calm when I arrived. The volunteers were already starting to set up for the day, moving quietly through the hallways, preparing activities for the residents. The air smelled faintly of coffee, and the soft hum of the building felt almost comforting. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was steady. Everything was just right. This was where I belonged. I hadn't realized how much I needed this peace until it settled in around me. For so long, I had been focused on what needed to be fixed, what needed to be done. I had been carrying my family's legacy, and in doing so, I had forgotten how to just breathe. But now, the air felt different, lighter. I wasn't responsible for anyone else's choices anymore. I didn't need to shoulder the weight of a system that wasn't mine to carry. Sitting at my desk, I looked out at the quiet office. The room wasn't much, just a small space with a desk, a few chairs, and a stack of papers, but it felt like home. I could hear the faint sounds of the volunteers moving around outside, talking in hushed tones as they prepared for the day's activities. The office smelled faintly of cedar, the same scent that had always calmed me, that had been a constant through all the years of chaos. I realized then that it wasn't the chaos that had kept me grounded, but the systems I had built, the ones I had created in the background, quietly holding everything up. They weren't visible to anyone else, but they were everything. They were what made this place function, what made it a home for so many. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. There were no more phone calls to answer, no more requests for help, no more last-minute meetings to attend. I didn't need to be the one who made everything work. It was as if the weight I had carried for so long had been gently lifted from my shoulders, leaving me with space to breathe. The first few days after the dinner had felt strange. The absence of my family's expectations was jarring. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. I didn't know how to live without the constant hum of crisis, of fixing things, of keeping everything running. But slowly, I found my rhythm. I started to enjoy the quiet moments, the small things, the sound of the keys in the office door, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft tapping of fingers on a keyboard as I worked. I didn't reach out to my parents, and I didn't reach out to Lena. Part of me wanted to check on them, to see if they were okay, but I knew that wasn't my job anymore. I had done enough. I had carried the weight of their expectations for far too long. It was time for them to figure things out on their own. I thought about Lena often, though. I couldn't help it. I had spent my whole life trying to help her, to fix things for her, to make sure she never had to deal with the hard stuff. But now, she was facing it. She was going to have to see what I had seen all along: the systems, the structure, the quiet work that kept everything running. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And now, it was hers. A week later, I ran into her. I hadn't planned on it. I was at one of the other facilities, checking on things, making sure everything was running smoothly. When I saw her, she was pushing a resident's wheelchair down the hall, her posture rigid and awkward, as though she wasn't quite sure how to move through this new world she had been thrust into. I paused for a moment, watching her from a distance. She didn't see me. She was focused, her eyes fixed ahead as she moved carefully down the hallway. She didn't look like the Lena I had known, the carefree, attention-seeking, always the center of everything Lena. She looked different, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. For a moment, I considered walking over to her, to say something, to offer her comfort. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, just watching her as she moved through the space, her movements slow but deliberate. She was doing it. She was taking care of something. She was doing what I had done for so long. I didn't know if she realized it, but in that moment, I saw her for the first time, not as my sister, not as the girl who had everything handed to her, but as someone who was finally facing what I had been facing all along. I didn't approach her. I didn't say anything. I just let her have the moment, whatever it was. It wasn't for me to fix anymore. It was hers now. And for the first time, I realized that my story, the one I had spent so long carrying, had come to an end. There was no big confrontation, no dramatic showdown. It had just quietly faded away. Families fracture loudly, but boundaries settle like dust. Soft, inevitable, impossible to sweep away once you finally stop pretending you're the one holding everything up. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anything that wasn't mine, and that was enough. I didn't look back.